The journey to the draft is driven by AAA. AAA, roadside is their strong side. Make AAA a part of your game day today. AAA, go ahead.
With the 25th pick in the NFL Draft, the Philadelphia Eagles select.
You're listening to the Journey to the Draft podcast, driven by AAA.
Well, welcome to the Journey to the Draft podcast driven by AAA. I'm Fran Duffy. We've got a loaded show, a little bit of a different show this week. Really excited to kind of dive into all things college football and the NFL draft. We've got a couple of guests here today I'm really excited about. But before we get into what this show is going to look like, just a quick reminder. When you get a chance, if you love this show, give us a little bit of support. Go on to Apple Podcasts or Stitcher, wherever you listen. Leave us a quick rating. Leave us a comment. It always helps. If you have a question, leave it there, and I guarantee it will get answered here on the show. This week on the program, we've got Ben Fennell at the top. We're going to talk about what he saw this past week in college football in Saturday Scouting, get a little bit of a preview of where he's heading for Rivalry Weekend. Then we welcome in a guy. I was really excited to talk to Kevin Negandhi from ESPN. You know him. He's a longtime ESPN on-air personality. He does a great job as an anchor for SportsCenter. He's also a studio host and does an outstanding job. He's got a podcast over there with ESPN that I want you to hear all about. So Kevin Negandhi talking about all things college football and a look towards the future there with the NFL draft. After that, we're going to talk to our friend Tony Pauline. He's got some breaking news about some players potentially entering the draft or staying in school for another year of eligibility. We've got scouting report on a top Senior Bowl player I'm excited about, and we'll wrap it up with your questions at home in our draft mailbag. But let's kick it off. Top of the show, as always, Saturday Scouting with Ben Fennell.
It's time for Saturday Scouting.
All right, so one more edition here of Saturday Scouting on the Journey to the Draft podcast driven by AAA. And I didn't mention at the top of the show, but just wanted to say it here at the top of this segment. Happy Thanksgiving to everybody at home, all the listeners. Thanks so much for all the attention that we've gotten for this podcast over the course of the college football season. Hope you stay with us here as we lead up to the 2020 NFL Draft. Ben, let me ask you one question. And I actually cringe. I hate the cliche things that every podcast does of favorite Thanksgiving food and the stuff like that. But I want to ask you, one overrated Thanksgiving food, one underrated Thanksgiving food, and then we're going to leave this alone.
Overrated, the turkey.
Okay.
Underrated,
cranberry sauce, overrated for me. That's my pick.
okay. And then underrated, I guess stuffing. I'll say underrated.
Ooh.
I don't think stuffing should just be subjected to only Thanksgiving. It's the only time
I
of
agree
year
with
you
that.
see that.
Yes, I agree with that.
I think stuffing's pretty strong, but collectively the Thanksgiving meal is pretty overrated in general. Just give me some pizza or wings or something.
Well, I mean,
give me some
probably,
sushi.
That's
Like,
probably
I don't-
off a little bit.
Yeah, I don't
But
like turkey.
I'm a big stuffing guy too. I would probably go with stuffing as underrated. All right. Let's
I'm
get
not
down.
a Thanksgiving guy anyways.
What does that mean?
Being involved in football, it's not like a holiday to me. Like everyone sits at home and watches a football game. Someone's got to work those games.
That's true.
So it's not even like a holiday to me. It's just a regular Thursday.
Another Thursday.
Just grinding.
Another day in the life of.
Is there college
Ben
games
Fennell.
on Thursday?
No, Egg Bowl.
Right.
Ole Miss and Mississippi State.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it's an interesting matchup.
Right. Couple high school turkey bowls and things like that. So.
No question. All right. But you were down at LSU, Arkansas this week.
Yep.
Your game ball is going to go to quarterback Joe Burrow. And I want to ask you this question at the very top. When you go down on the field pregame, you watch Joe Burrow warm up. You watched him during the course of this game. They blew out Arkansas. It wasn't close. His numbers were great. Did you get the sense I'm watching the number one pick of the draft?
No. He doesn't
Interesting.
do anything that wows you.
Yeah.
It's not like the ball flies out of his hands in pregame or he's huge or has a big presence to him or makes these wow throws in the game where you're like, whoa, look at that tight window throw. Look at the accuracy. Look at the arm strength. He's just a really good player. He's managing the offense really well. He doesn't make mistakes. It was a classic Joe Burrow game. No sacks, no turnovers, accurate. But does he look like the number one overall pick? Like, wow, game changer,
Right.
franchise, CEO of your team? No, not particularly.
Interesting. That's what I wanted to ask you.
Does he have that aesthetic wow factor? That's kind of like
Right.
what you're asking?
Yes.
No, he doesn't.
You're right. But,
he's very boring.
right. Right.
But that's okay.
Yep.
There's plenty of coaches that would want that boring quarterback. Drew Brees is boring. Tom Brady is boring. Peyton Manning was pretty boring. Those guys won a lot of football games, completed a lot of passes. So that wow factor, of that swag factor, he's a little bit more like the Andrew Luck, where it's just like ho-hum type of deal, doing his job. And Andrew Luck probably had some more redeeming qualities as a quarterback and as a pocket passer.
From a physical standpoint, sure.
But it's that style of prospect that you're just not getting overly excited with. And obviously this generation of quarterback with Lamar Jacksons and Russell Wilsons and Deshaun Watsons and Mahomes, and it's really easy to kind of get lost in wanting Kyler Murray's, be excited about these dynamic quarterbacks, and you see these kind of ho-hum pocket passers. No, he doesn't look that exciting, but that's okay. That doesn't mean he cannot be successful or he won't be the number 1 overall pick.
Did anything change for you seeing him live? Or do you still feel like...
If anything, I feel stronger about the concerns that I had coming into the game.
Got it. Okay. Lay those out for us.
Yeah, and just, so he's going to get the game ball. He's 23 of 28, 300 yards, 3 touchdowns, no picks, no sacks. They had 600 yards of offense. He had 5 third downs. They were 2 of 5 on third down.
Which game was that before?
The time of possession was 19 minutes to 40 minutes.
That's insane.
19 minutes being LSU.
Right, yeah.
They just march up and down the field, and not like really milking drives or anything like that, but a bunch of his touchdowns, the 2 deep balls to Jamar Chase, that's going to be my one-play takeaways, both of them underthrown, where Chase, kind of had to throttle back a little bit. One of them, he made a nice contested catch. One, he just was so open, he just had to kind of wait a step for it. But the arm strength is really going to get picked apart with Joe Burrow. I'm not saying it's a Chad Pennington level of arm, which Chad Pennington won a lot of games in this league as well. So I'm not saying you can't win with it, but once we get into combine mode, when he's in his shorts and a T-shirt against all these other 6'5", 6'6" quarterbacks where that ball's really flying out of their hands, no, he doesn't have a strong arm. But that's okay. He's accurate. He's decisive. He knows where to go with the ball. He plays with really good ball security. He's going to win a lot of games for somebody in the NFL, but just don't expect him to make these wow throws, on a down-to-down basis.
Interesting. Yeah, it's he's going to be very much in the discussion, obviously, for the top pick. And, with this quarterback class, there's a lot of shine on Joe Burrow, but I think there's some flaws as well. I was glad that you pointed one of those out. All right, let's get to your off-the-bus guy. Who impressed you most from a physical standpoint? Obviously, it was not Burrow from a physical tool standpoint and what they looked like in person, but who impressed you off the cuff?
Yeah, this line does not get enough credit, in my opinion. Whenever the running game's taken off, everybody loves the back. When the pass game's taken off, everyone loves Burrow and the receivers. The offensive line's doing some great work, and they had to do some shuffling this week with their left tackle, Shuddy Charles, out. So they slid Adrian McGee over to left tackle from his guard position. Adrian McGee is 340. Damian Lewis at right guard's 335. Damian Lewis had 2 brutal pancake blocks in the game that were all over Twitter.
I did see those.
Fun to watch. Yes. Absolutely just crushed. One of them was on a little combo block where he got some help from the center and then finished McTelvin again.
Torqued him to the ground.
And then was a linebacker he just grabbed and slammed into the turf. Really fun to watch. But looking at them in pregame warmups, they are enormous. 330, 340 respectively. Just some big guys. I just don't think that O-line gets a lot of credit.
No, I would agree with you. No, you made that point last week that you challenge any casual college football fan, name one of the LSU offensive linemen.
And that's just life of being an offensive lineman.
Yeah, for the most part, yes.
Good pass protection, 65 snaps. That one you took a bad step on and got smoked, that's the one that's probably on Twitter. So that's just kind of life of being a trench player.
All right, let's get to a down-the-road freak show. And I know that LSU, they've got a couple guys. You mentioned Jamar Chase earlier.
Yep, who's a sophomore,
not eligible for this year. But they've got some other guys. Who's one that stands out to you?
Yeah, not breaking any news here. Derek Stingley Jr., the cornerback out there, true freshman, the only true freshman on the Benerick Award.
Okay,
semifinals. That's the Defensive Player of the Year, I believe. Not the Outland, right?
Correct. Yeah, Outland is
only true freshman as a semifinalist. So
nice.
Impressive player. Had a bunch of good plays on the ball. He has really, really quick feet. And they're a mess at the line of scrimmage right now, but they're so fast he can recover really quickly. And he loves to use his hands and jams in concert with his footwork. So he does a really good job. He's just a through and through press cornerback.
Interesting.
Really good player.
Yeah, I'm excited to dig into him in the future. And then lastly, I want to bring up those wide receivers. You mentioned Jamar Chase earlier, Justin Jefferson. He's draft eligible. You talked about him last week. What did you see from those guys in this game?
Yeah, kind of same old. Chase is just a really good size and speed receiver. His catch adjustments, he's strong. You run down the field. He's aggressive after the catch. A little too aggressive in the game. He fought through a couple tackles, ended up fumbling. Justin Jefferson had a brutal drop.
Yep.
Then Burrow went back to him on 3 or 4 plays on that same drive. First down, touchdown to Justin Jefferson. So
Interesting.
I just see more of a Keenan Allen type of player with Justin Jefferson being kind of a taller, upright slot receiver with a really dynamic release package, good route running. It's just a really fun LSU offense to see running backs and tight ends featured in the offense. That they're not just kept in pass protect.
Right.
We're seeing Hilaire motioned out. We're seeing Hilaire run angle routes and featured in the pass game.
Get 7 catches this week.
Thaddeus Moss, Randy Moss's son, playing tight end. They're getting him down the field and down the seam. And there's a lot of interesting weapons in the offense, but the old LSU offense was a lot of 7-man pass pro on third downs, keeping the tight end, the back end. We never really got to see Foster Moreau in the pass game. Never got to see Nick Brissett in the pass game. Never got to really see Darius Geis in the pass game, aside from some screens and checkdowns and things like that. But just really fun to see the whole bevy of weapons kind of at the disposal of Joe Brady in that LSU offense.
Yeah, it has been a really fun group to watch, and it will be a fun group to watch here.
Didn't realize how young Joe Brady is as well.
Yeah.
He's like 35
I know,
or something.
he's very young.
I'm kind of just judging by the way he looked.
He's going to be one and done there. He's not for long.
He came
for
out
LSU.
with the players in pregame in a suit with Beats headphones and Jordan sneakers on. He really looked like a quarterback kind of coming out and just checking the lay of the land off the bus.
Yeah, he's not for long for LSU for sure. So my takeaways from Saturday's action, I watched a good chunk of Ohio State, Penn State. That game went a little bit differently than I would have thought. Penn State was able to come up with some big stops, had a couple turnovers. I had tweeted before the game that they were going to need to stop the run, limit J.K. Dobbins in this game, and a couple forced fumbles helped in that matter. And I know Justin Fields was responsible for one of those as well down on the goal line. But Penn State was able to keep it close. The backup quarterback comes in. He kind of gives them a little bit of a spark, especially in the run game. But obviously Ohio State's talent kind of took over there. My game ball, though, goes to the game that I watched at night. And as usual, I ended up watching Pac-12. I ended up with Oregon and Arizona State. Arizona State, with the upset, Justin Herbert did not look good.
No, he did not.
I think it's very important to say, before I get to who my game ball was, it's important not to ride the wave. I think a lot of fans, and it's not just Eagles fans who listen to this show. You might be a fan of, the Bengals or, any of those teams that are up at the top that are going to be potentially looking at a quarterback. When you're looking at all these guys, to not ride the wave week to week and say, oh, Joe Burrow looked great this week and Justin Herbert looked great. Oh, well, Burrow looked bad this week, but Herbert looked great and now Herbert looks bad, so drop him down. You got to let the whole body of work play out. I know it's tough. Actually, that's why I asked Andy Weidel that when he joined us a couple weeks ago on the show about how hard is it to kind of stay for scouts when they're on the road to not be live in the moment and say, man, I just saw him yesterday and he was outstanding. This guy's going to be here, for me and how I stack my players later on this fall, because you got to take in the whole body of work. So I know Herbert was bad. It's going to go down as his worst game, I would say, this fall, unless, we'll see what happens the next few weeks. But don't go crazy with the overreaction. And I would say the same thing about it in a positive respect, too. You got to let the whole thing play out. All the issues we had with Herbert last week, they continue this week. And I think a bad performance against Arizona State doesn't necessarily change that.
I had a chance to talk with a scout over the weekend, and we were just talking about evaluations and conviction. And he was saying that his boss does not pay him to be undecided on players. And he's like, I have to be convicted and have a conviction in how I feel about these players when I present it to the GM.
Yep.
And he's like, sometimes I feel like that's my Twitter hot take, and that I have to either choose I'm all in or all out on this player.
Right.
And I feel like that's when scouts get in trouble. It's because they have to tell their boss, is he the guy or is he not the guy? Is
right.
it, A or B, red or blue type of thing? And it's really tough to do. Never really thought about it from a scout's perspective. You can't just waffle and play it down the middle on a player. You have to have some conviction and really trust what you see. And some of them work out and some of them don't. And obviously the quarterback position and drafting and evaluating is not a perfect science. It's not an exact science. It's been very credible people in front offices for decades and decades with some brutal misses.
Yep.
So it's really fun just to kind of dig through that process, especially when you have players that are up and down on a week-to-week basis that make their evaluation that much more difficult and trying to figure out what is their projection to the next level. Was it this week? Was it last week? Are we going to get the next week player?
Yep.
So it's really kind of fun, and it's a fluid process, and there is no right or wrong way to kind of to skin it.
Yeah, I think that, if you go from a team perspective, if let's say, there was a team that was there at Oregon, Arizona State last week, and, the GM, maybe this is the first time he ever saw Herbert live, he's going to walk away saying like, oh, there's no shot. But that's where the area scout comes in and says, look, like I've seen this guy live 5-6 times over the course of his career. this was a bad game.
Right.
Let's accept that. We move on. Here's some of the other things that he does really, really well. It's funny you mentioned like how guys can't really live in the middle. I think there are a lot of teams out there. Really, there's two ways that teams kind of grade players. There's round grades, and then there's, I would say, like role grades. Oh, this guy's a starter. He's a backup. He's a role player, so on and so forth. Or he's a first-round pick, second-round pick, third-round pick. A lot of teams that use the round grading system, a lot of their scouts will get caught if they kind of aren't sure how to feel about a guy, put him in the third or fourth round and say like, oh yeah,
right.
He could be great, or like if he turns out well, it's like, yeah, man, I had him in the third round.
It's kind of hedging your bet as a scout.
That's what it is, and you do not want that if you're a GM to the point that.
But you can also get yourself in trouble by having conviction and being wrong.
Exactly.
Just going all in and say, you know what, I believe in this kid. I think he's a first round pick. We can win with him.
Yep.
And then suddenly you get him, and maybe the kid's not as smart as you thought he was,
right.
or there's some sort of other, intangible that's preventing his success. And it was really fun to dig through Dane Brugler's article in The Athletic on draft hits and misses.
Right. Yep.
We don't have to get in particulars, but the variety of reasons on why players fail is such an interesting study.
It is,
because it's rarely ability.
It's almost never.
And in a weird reflection, it's like the last chance U players. You got to stand up to those kids in JUCO. Nobody's here problem is ability.
Right. Yep.
There's a lot of other things going on with you guys.
Yep.
And I just think it's really interesting when you get these first-round quarterbacks. Rarely is it the ability, or first-round players in general, the ability that's preventing their success.
Yep.
So it's just kind of an interesting study to go through that list and why players failed.
And that's why a lot of teams will always take chances later and with second, third contracts on former first-round picks because talent's not the question. It's can we get the light to turn on? Yep. Can we get guys to fulfill that potential? All right, so. Back to the on topic here. My game ball from that game goes to Brandon Ayuk, a guy we've talked about a few times here on this podcast. He is heading to the Senior Bowl. Had an 81-yard touchdown late in the game. It turned into a little bit of a shootout late in the second half. The team went back and forth, but Ayuk, I believe it was 81 yards, 86 yards. Huge play, double move, a vertical play, touchdown. But this guy made a number of big plays in the game. Some punt returns that were big to kind of flip the field for Arizona State. He was a big reason why they won that game. And one of the more dynamic playmakers we've seen at the wide receiver position that really not a lot of people are talking about to this point. And I think, we had Jim Nagy on last week. He said, it would not surprise me if Ayuk played his way into round one over the course of the next few months.
Interesting. I see him as kind of like a Paris Campbell type of prospect that he's going to test with elite speed.
Yep.
Was buried on the depth chart the past couple of years with N'Keal Harry and Kyle Williams at Arizona State. Also, Manny Wilkins just really wasn't that great of a quarterback, in my opinion.
Yep. This kid that's playing quarterback for them at Arizona State, I think.
Jaden Daniels, very good player. True freshman.
Yep.
Yeah, he's definitely got some talent. He's got a really strong arm, but hit that stutter go on Diamador Lenore, one of my favorite corners out there in Oregon. That's kind of his problem out there. It is not really a twitchy, long speed corner. Was it caught in off coverage, which you see, which is just tough position for double moves.
Yep.
You see that in Big 12 quite a bit against off coverage there, but one step on Ayuk, and then he kind of saw the safety coming late, and you saw that extra gear.
He flies, man.
He's just the road runner.
And his speed doesn't change when he's got the ball in his hands either. He's very dynamic after the catch. That's one of my favorite things.
I love his acceleration through catch points.
Yes.
He's not a guy that has to slow down, get it, and then go again.
Yep.
He has kind of confident hands in combination with his speed to catch and go, and I love that trait.
Not a lot of people talking about Brandon Ayuk. Not enough people, I should say, talking about Brandon Ayuk.
And the only way you can accelerate through the catch point is to have confident hands.
Yes.
And that's a great little kind of test and snapshot of a player's confidence in their hands and whether they have natural hands is if they can maintain their speed through the catch point, and then the really good ones can accelerate through the catch point. Some guys like Odell Beckham, Antonio Brown, really good at that.
Honestly, I just watched Tyler Johnson, the Minnesota kid, this morning.
Yep.
He does that. He accelerates through the catch point. He doesn't have the juice that Ayuk does, but he's got that
There's
trait.
even some craftiness, like guys like Keenan Allen will slow play their routes to then accelerate through the catch.
Yep.
So it's almost like that manipulation of speeds and pacing in order just to set up the catch point. It's really kind of clever.
All right, well, let's get to where you're heading this week. You got it's rivalry weekend. All right, so a lot of big matchups. You've got Ohio State,
couple
Michigan.
Weird non-conference games too. Yep.
It's one of my favorite weekends of college football because you get those big conference matchups, but then you also have those interstate rivalries that maybe we don't always think about. You've got one of them in Clemson, South Carolina.
Yeah, and I think it did this game a couple of years ago too, and South Carolina just cannot get it going against Clemson here.
No.
I know Muschamp is looking for that signature win. They already beat Georgia, number one team in the country. They would love to come into Clemson and knock them off. And this is really one of Clemson's tougher tests of the season.
It is.
I think the second SEC team they've had to face this year. They already played Texas A&M.
Yep.
But South Carolina is just looking for that one bit of juice in one of these. I think it's Magnolia Bowl.
I believe so, yes.
Matchup. Yeah.
Yep.
To take down Clemson here.
So you've done both teams already. You had Clemson versus North Carolina, and that near upset early in the season.
And South Carolina against Florida.
Right, correct. So we're not going to dive too deep into all the players across the board. I think we could talk about some matchups, especially because a lot of the senior, there's 7 guys going to the Senior Bowl in this game.
Yep.
They all kind of match up against each other in one way.
It's kind of interesting.
One way or form or the other. So let's talk first about the Clemson O-line against the South Carolina defensive line, because we've got a handful of guys that are going to see each other more often than not in this game.
It's kind of funny because these guys are going to see each other again at the Senior Bowl in one-on-ones.
Yes.
And I do not like this matchup for Tremaine Ankrum. Tremaine Ankram's just a shade over 6'2", which is concerning for a tackle.
And he's the right tackle for Clemson.
Can he be a Marshall Newhouse, Charles Leno at the next level? I think he can. But when DJ Wanham steps up over him, who's every bit of 6'5", long arms, huge wingspan, 83-inch wingspan, 6'5", former basketball player, 252. I just really get concerned about the length against kind of a squattier, shorter tackle in Ankrum.
His anchor is going to be tested in this one, because that's really when you watch DJ Wanham, he's a guy that, he's got a couple of tools in the toolbox. He'll win with a double hand swipe. He's got a quick swim move in there. He's got a couple of tricks in his bag. But ultimately, I think everything, he wants to go bull rush. He wants to go long arm and kind of work some different things off of that. So for Ankrum in this game, he's got to be able to show that anchor, make sure that he's got the ability to hold up against that bull rush, against that long arm. Don't give up any ground in the pocket. That's going to be the big test for him.
And the advantage for Wanham is they start to slide a couple extra players towards Javon Kinlaw inside.
Yep.
Maybe slide over Simpson or Gage Cervenka at guard and just give that extra attention to Kinlaw.
Yep.
Opens up some one-on-ones on the outside for Wanham.
Yep. So to just go through this Clemson O-line real quick, left guard John Simpson, big physical mauler. Like he is a quote unquote people mover. Like that's John Simpson at left guard. He's going to the Senior Bowl. The center Cervenka, is Cervenka at center or right guard this year?
He's been right guard, but he's been rotating.
Okay, so Sean Pollard is at center.
Yes.
Sean Pollard's going to the Shrine Game. Cervenka at right guard also going to the Shrine Game. Tremaine Ankrum, right tackle, going to the Senior Bowl. So you've got 2 Senior Bowl guys, 2 Shrine Game guys, making up 4/5 of that Clemson offensive line. Let's talk about that matchup now against Kinlaw. Javon Kinlaw is a guy we've talked about a lot. He's that defensive tackle anchoring the inside of Will Muschamp's defense. Thoughts on Kinlaw, who has shed a little bit of weight? You've seen him live a few times throughout the course of his career. What are your thoughts on Kinlaw going into this
he's down
matchup?
some weight this year. He also had an undocumented hip injury that he got taken care of in the offseason.
Last year, yep.
And I always like kind of hearing those stories of the surgeries, the injuries that really aren't in the public. Maybe you just look at a player and say, there's something wrong with him. Sometimes there is.
Yep.
And it just takes a little bit of homework to kind of find that out.
And he played through it last year, which is
no
big.
question.
Yep.
That's another great trait. I think he kind of ascends like a Chris Jones player, like he did at Mississippi State, into the first round with the Chiefs, and has really turned into a dominant, disruptive player. I just really need him to refine his technique. Need him to get lower with his pad level.
Yep.
He's kind of a tall trench player. Need more counter moves, more of a pass rush plan. He's a strong player. He's a good run defender. Impact the pass game more.
Yep.
And you'll be a first-round player.
Yep.
Right now, I see him as kind of an early day 2. May get bumped up as we start to look at this interior D-line class, and it might not be as deep as we're thinking. So once you get past the Derek Browns and Raekwon Davises of the world, it might be Kinlaw. So he could be that 20 to 30 in the first round, and if he doesn't test well in the offseason and maybe gets pushed around a little bit at the combine, gets pushed into day 2.
Yeah, I think Kinlaw, the big thing for me that I'd like to be able to see in this game and also at one-on-ones at the Senior Bowl, can you win quickly as a pass rusher?
Right.
Like that's what I want to see from
disruption,
Kinlaw.
yep.
He can defend the run. He's good with his hands at the point of attack. He's really strong. He's got some pop. I want to see if he can win quickly. That, to me, is like the differentiation between a guy who's a really good player at D-tackle versus the elites. You look at the elites, Aaron Donald, Fletcher Cox, Geno Atkins, Grady Jarrett, all those guys, we mentioned Chris Jones, they win quickly. I want to be able to see that from Kinlaw in this game. John Simpson, I mentioned the power and the strength. He's not really athletic. He's a little bit heavy-footed. So to me, that's the question I've got for Simpson. This would be a matchup where I'd say, all right, Kinlaw, like if you're quick, if you got that ability to win off the ball, I want to see you do it against this guy who's also headed to the Senior Bowl.
I also feel like the people that are really high on Kinlaw are the ones that have really watched his tape.
Yeah.
Because his production in the stat sheet doesn't show.
No question.
I feel like he impacts the game a lot more on the tape than it shows in his stat sheet. And you just put on that Georgia game, a lot of pressures on Fromm, a lot of instant disruption in keeping TJ Brunson free behind him.
Yep.
So those plays, if you just look at the stat sheet and say, oh, geez, I mean, he's only got a couple sacks, only got a couple TFLs, his impact on the game is greater. So if he gets to the right scheme in the NFL, maybe he turns into an under tackle like Chris Jones is in Kansas City, he can maybe be a double-digit sack guy.
Could be. Yeah, let's talk about the other side of the ball now. Clemson, they've got that secondary that we've talked a good amount about. And they've got two guys heading to the Senior Bowl. Kevon Wallace, the safety, and Tanner Muse, another safety. There's also got the junior safety in Isaiah Simmons, who's a little bit of a hybrid or a tweener, depending on who you ask. A little bit of a hybrid linebacker safety that can kind of do everything. But Kevon Wallace is a guy that I really, really like on film. I think he's really the prototype for today's strong safety in the NFL, going up against a South Carolina pass game that features another Senior Bowl guy in Brian Edwards, the wide receiver.
Yeah, Kevon Wallace, this guy's been on the field a ton. I mean, he's been through two different championship teams at Clemson, 2016 and 2018. Has done some internships off the field. Apparently, he's a really good kid behind the scenes, honor roll. Played both ways at Virginia. First team All-State as a DB and a receiver. You always love the receiver background from corners just to see the ball skills. Just get worried. I don't think he's going to test well. He doesn't have the elite speed. Doesn't really have that recovery element. He's a little bit small to come down and be a kind of a box thumper. But I think that's what you want in today's nickel.
Yep.
That guy was just enough size. He's not too undersized. He's got good ball skills. A couple of my comps right now, Ibrahim Campbell at Northwestern, smart kid who's carved out a nice role for the Packers. Tony Jefferson, who's played a lot of snaps in this league. And Antoine Bethea, another guy who's played 13, 14, 15 years in the NFL. I could just see Kevon Wallace not being an elite, high side kind of trait guy, but a guy I just think is going to be tough to cut, tough to take off the field, special teams player, safety, nickel, kind of a hybrid-y, cover corner. I just think he can wear a lot of hats for you. He's an experienced player. I'm sure, Dabo's got nothing but great things to say about a player like that who stayed for his senior year, and he's won a lot of games out there. I just think he's going to be a nice NFL player for a number of years.
How different is he than Desmond King?
That's a fine comp, too, because Desmond King was not an elite treat guy. He's not going to test well, in my opinion. He's probably going to run 4.59 or something.
And that was the knock on
But he's
King.
played a lot of games. He's zone savvy. He can play inside, play outside, play special teams.
Tough. He's really instinctive downhill.
I think King had a little bit more size, and King's really impressed me with his toughness in the box. And, I put up a play on Twitter a couple months ago of him setting the edge against Quentin Nelson. And we remember Quentin Nelson murdering safeties last year in the run game, and he set a physical edge, Desmond King, and kind of forced the run back. I was really impressed. I don't know if Kevon Wallace has that type of play strength, but he's just a really well-rounded player.
Tanner Muse also heading to the Senior Bowl. He plays safety. I honestly think
he's a strange player.
I think he's going to be more of a backer. I think at the end of the day, he'll be a linebacker in the NFL.
I just look at him when you just put him in a vacuum. Don't look at where he is on the field, because he plays a safety position. But his skill set, his size, his traits, is he really that different than a Blake Martinez in Green Bay? You have to also consider he's 6'2", 230 playing safety. He's really more of a box player. Remember Thomas Davis at Georgia was a safety who ended up being a linebacker in the NFL. I think he's still a linebacker in the NFL for somebody.
Nate Gary here in Philadelphia.
Yep. Or a Keyshawn Barea from Washington, that undersized type of safety, come down and be a backer. Brian Roll from Ohio State, who was an Eagle for a couple of years. Some of my issues with him, just a little stiff, upright, not fluid movement patterns. I don't really like his speed. I don't think he can cover wide receivers. Inconsistent tackling at times, really doesn't finish. But I love his instincts, love his awareness. He's rarely out of position. He's got some pass rushing ability. He's beat some offensive linemen. He's big body safety. He'll thump you when he comes down into the box. Also a good baseball prospect, so he's a good athlete. And another guy who stayed for his senior year and has played a lot of football for Clemson.
I could see him profiling. The tackling does need to clean up, but I think he can be a nice special teams player and kind of a core 4 guy, but also be a backup linebacker in the NFL. That's kind of how I view Tanner Muse. Let's talk about Bryan Edwards. Big-bodied receiver who can get off a jam. And he's pretty consistent at the catch point. What have you seen from Bryan Edwards when you studied him on film and seen him live?
Yeah, I just want to see more playmaking down the field. I know we watched some tape of him in the summer, really struggling to track the ball over his shoulder, and it's a shame because he's got good speed, he's got good releases, and he gets open.
Yep.
If we somehow find out his hands aren't natural and he can't make those tough catches down the field, I don't really know if you're going to be able to play in the NFL. So sometimes he looks like that Kenny Britt 4.47 type of player, and sometimes he looks like Brian Quick, where he's got all the traits and the size and the speed and just can't make the plays on the ball.
Right.
Allen Robinson, same size, same weight, ran 4.6. Ended up being probably the better of the NFL player out of those 3 players.
Right.
Kenny Britt, Brian Quick, and Allen Robinson. But that's Bryan Edwards. He's a technician. He's got length. He's got size. He's got good releases. Good possession receiver with slants, digs, curls, all those pro-style type of timing routes. And then he's also had some issues at the quarterback position. They thought Jake Bentley was kind of the guy from being a true freshman and has kind of dealt with changing of the guard there. He's had some injuries. He got benched last year. They have a true freshman, Helinski, in there now, who's had a really nice season. So really nice player, but I think he's going to make a lot of his money at the Senior Bowl if he could carve up some better corners in one-on-ones.
Yeah, it's going to be big for him down there in Mobile. All right, let's get to my matchup to watch, and I'm going to go to the Iron Bowl, one of the best games of the year, on a year-after-year basis. Auburn, Alabama. I'm going to look in the trenches. Auburn's got those 2 senior tackles. Prince Tega heading to the Senior Bowl. He is the left tackle. Hasn't played a whole lot of football in his life. He didn't pick up football until later in high school, but really athletic. He's got some anchor strength. Needs to clean up some things with his hands, but a really interesting prospect. And then the other kid, Jack Driscoll, at right tackle. Just watching Driscoll, a little bit undersized. There's going to be some concern about his ability to hold up from a play strength standpoint. He's probably more of a guard than he is a tackle, but he's a technician. He's really good with his hands. He's methodical in his set. I think he's got the mindset of an NFL offensive lineman.
You'd like him more or less than Braden Smith, who's really carved out a great role for the Indianapolis Colts after taking him in the 2nd round. I know Quentin Nelson stole so much of the attention in that draft. But Braden Smith, I think, has been the right tackle for as long as Quentin Nelson has been the left guard for the Colts. And I didn't really see that from him at Auburn.
I did not either, yes.
But I think as we were kind of looking at Driscoll the other day, he just got that same feel that, really balanced player, strong player. You want a little bit more, but somebody that could probably be a slightly above average starter for somebody for, 7-8 years.
Yeah, that's what'll be interesting is that I think the difference is Smith probably had a little bit more physical capability. He was a little bit bigger, a little bit more athletic, a little bit more powerful, whereas this kid, he's just really good with his hands. He maximizes everything, and ultimately he may be completely maxed out when you look at Driscoll, but this kid's a football player. He's going to stick in the league. It's just a matter of what the upside is.
And
there.
Driscoll's going to the Shrine?
Driscoll's going to the Shrine.
Right.
Tega is going to the Senior Bowl.
Right.
And let's get now to the on the other side, Alabama. They've got those 2 edge rushers. Anthony Jennings is a senior. He's not as physically gifted as you would say, like, I want this guy as a 1st, 2nd, 3rd round pick, but well-rounded player, smart pass rusher, has some tools in the toolbox, good run defender, high motor, all
really
those
more
things.
of a Sam linebacker than a true defensive end. And I think he gets pushed into the edge category. So you think he's going to be this quarterback hunter. He plays in space quite a bit. He zone drops quite a bit. He has coverage assignments on tight ends every now and then. Really strong football player. Has been on the field a ton. A guy that's not going to wow you, I think, with his pass rushing ability, but a guy that's going to set the edge for you, a guy that has some versatility in coverage, a guy that's a really well-rounded football player that I think can play all 3 downs, just won't do anything to really take you over the top.
Exactly. But Terrell Lewis on the other side, I think he's the quarterback.
A little
hunter.
Bit different. Yeah, I think he's got a bag of pass rush ability, different moves, inside, outside, spins, long arms, can win with speed, dynamic player, short area burst, closing speed, the first step, the whole deal. The big issue with him is just the injuries. And once he gets the medicals done at the combine, whether it's this year or next year, he might be graduated. Actually, I'm not positive. Terrell Lewis.
I think he is. I think he is graduating this December, if I'm correct.
Which always creates and opens up some interesting possibilities for him if he's
if he wants to go to the Senior Bowl.
A 3rd-year graduate and wants to come out. But by all means, if he wants to hang out for his senior season, and if he got, maybe a second or third round grade and thinks he could push himself into the first round now that he's fully healthy.
Yep.
He's a guy that I think's really hitting his stride right now as well.
I think so.
If he feels like he has more to offer, he could stay for another year.
Who do you like in this game? Bama, I think, is favored by 3 or 3.5.
I'm all thrown off right now because I wanted chaos and madness. So I wanted to see Auburn win,
right?
Give Alabama that second loss, and suddenly Oregon's only loss would have looked really impressive, but now Oregon got beat last week.
Yeah.
So now I'm thinking if we have to choose between, it's going to come down to if Utah beats Oregon in the Pac-12 championship, it's going to come down to Utah and Alabama. Who do you put in as that number 4 spot? Assuming
with Oklahoma,
assuming LSU beats Georgia, things like that. So if LSU loses to Georgia, I don't know.
The Georgia, I think, is in.
I don't know. But to answer your question, let's go with Alabama here.
All right.
I think Mac Jones, great game last week. Did everything to get the ball out of his hands. These receivers on the outside, Devonta Smith, he might be better than Ruggs and Judy.
They're all. It's silly.
And I know they were playing Western Carolina or the Citadel or whoever it was last week, and they just look so much faster than every other player on the field.
Devonta Smith torched Stingley twice in that game, in the LSU game a couple weeks ago. They're all freaky
and then
fast.
Jalen Waddle,
I know it's ridiculous. We're going to talk a little bit more about the playoff scenario here in a few minutes with Kevin Negandhi when he joins. But while we're talking about Alabama, I came across this article on Tuesday, and I thought, you know what? Let's talk about this with Ben. And it's an article from Matt Zenitz from AL.com, one of the more important Alabama beat writers. If you want to follow him on Twitter, I'm not going to go through the entire article, but if you want to read the whole thing, go check it out on his Twitter feed. Really, we're starting to get it's anonymous scout season, and here's my thing with anonymous scout quotes. I want to get your thoughts on this too.
I just got a text from an anonymous scout.
Anonymous, is it in your phone as anonymous scout?
Nah, we got a name on it.
Oh, okay, all right. Well, I think when you read things from anonymous scouts, number one, this isn't a quote. This isn't something I've stole, but Josh Norris, a friend of the podcast from Roto World NBC Sports, says if you trust the writer, you can trust the anonymous quote. I like that. I like that a lot.
That's good. Okay.
I like that a lot. And then number two,
credible writer, credible sources type of thing. Yeah.
And then number two, there's hundreds of scouts.
Yes.
And with just like every profession, there are some really good scouts. There are some scouts that are solid. There are some that are just okay. There are some scouts that'll put out things just because they want to see it put out. There are some that are just like, I'm going to say this because it's crazy and I want to see if it gets, or like they just feel like they want to get their thoughts out there. So when you see anonymous scout quotes, and I think there's a lot of this talk, especially with like Lamar Jackson's success and stuff like that, you got to take it with a grain of salt. But with some of the things, there's a little bit of truth there too.
The scouting, it's not really fair. The scouting community, it's not like you could just call yourself a lawyer. You have to pass the bar exam. You can't just call yourself a doctor. You got to go to medical school. What's the credentials to be a scout?
Right.
Do you have to show that you're a scout for a team in order to call yourself a scout? I think my 8-year-old nephew's a scout.
I mean, he might be a Boy Scout.
He's one of my anonymous sources, by the way. So,
well, that explains some things.
But just all these scouts out there, like anyone can call themselves a scout.
Right. Well, so I saw this article and I said, all right, let's take a look and see. Matt Zenitz, the idea of the article was I'm going to catch up with some NFL scouts and get some thoughts on what the league is talking about with some of Alabama's top prospects. So I pulled a few of them that I found to be interesting. I just want to kind of share them with you.
Yeah.
First one, Raekwon Davis, player you and I both really like on film. Here's the quote. I've talked to some other scouts about Raekwon, one scout said. They think Raekwon's played well, and they think he's going to be a lock first-rounder. I think he's a solid first-round guy, another scout said. It's mostly because of his just his God-given strength and size, and he has played much better this year, just had more production and done better across the board, technique and pass rush and everything. The thing that's going to knock him down is the off-field issues and intangibles. And I think that's notable, only 2 tackles for loss this year and only a half sack so far. So lack of production is obviously one thing that's going to be a knock on Raekwon Davis. He was not productive last year either, although I want to say his sophomore year, I think he had 8.5 sacks for Alabama. Yes, so the production did show up that year. But what are your thoughts hearing that? Especially the thing that we don't know is the off-field and intangible stuff. I mean, that's the stuff that that shows up in these anonymous scout quotes that you almost have to say like, all right, well, you note it, but we don't know on the outside for sure.
Yeah, the production thing is interesting because he doesn't have the quick twitch that Quinn Williams had or even Deron Payne had like against Georgia in the playoffs. So he's not getting into the backfield as much. He's more of that true He's closer to a Ashawn Robinson than he is to Jonathan Allen or Ron Payne. In being more of a two-gapping trench player that doesn't have the backfield production. What I mean by backfield production, tackling running backs, tackling the quarterback, getting the numbers in the stat sheet. Now, the off-the-field stuff is interesting just to dig into, and these are the types of stories that we're going to find. We can learn a lot about a guy on the tape. But like Dan Hatman said on your scouting series over the summer, understand the limitations of the tape.
Can't get everything.
And you cannot learn everything about the human being on the tape.
Right.
Can you learn about the player? Sure. But you're getting an employee. You're getting a person. You're getting a man. You're getting a coworker. You're getting a friend. Who are you getting? Aside from that 3.5 hours on Sundays, where he's playing on the field. Because there's 6 other days and he's an employee and he's working with people and that stuff matters. And it goes back to Dane's article of why draft players failed. There's a lot of off the field issues with some of those players.
Yeah, and it's not necessarily, this guy was a bad guy. It's just, there's things that just don't work out.
And for the record, I've done a handful of Alabama games since he's been there. I have not heard one thing.
Right.
So when you brought this up earlier, I thought I'd investigate and text a friend or two, and it's really not that widespread out there. So I'm not saying he's some bad guy off the field. Of course. This is just somebody's sentiment about it, and there's a little bit of a narrative behind it.
That's the thing with me. With just because one person says it doesn't mean it's gospel and it's 100, but that's one person's opinion. So you take it for what it's worth. All right, next one. Cornerback Trayvon Diggs, a guy you and I both like, played poorly against LSU. One scout said, you just have to hang your hat on his ball skills, his playmaking ability, that they're so good. Whenever he's in the right mindset, he's an elite player. I'm not sure what happened to him in that game against LSU, but he's still on the verge of being a first-round pick, clearly an NFL starter, so there's no doubt he goes high. Another scout said he looks the part. It's going to be important what he runs. He's a build-up speed guy. I don't think he's instant fast, but he's going to be a point of conversation in the first round, certainly no later than the second.
I mean, what corners at 6'2", 210 are an instant speed type of guy?
There's not many of those
you're
guys.
Getting that guy for his size and his length. And his physicality and his ball skills and the whole deal. And the cornerback position, it's all about the body of work. They're going to have some bad games. They're going to give up some catches. They're going to get beat on some double moves. They're going to be late to find the ball at times. That's just the nature of the position. It's like being a defender in the NBA. You're going to get blown past. You're going to get dunked on. Can you keep it tempered for the collective game and the collective body of work? And I think Trayvon Diggs is a good player. All corners get beat. He had a bad game against LSU.
And honestly, some of the catches he gave up against LSU were stupid good catches by Jefferson and Chase.
And from what he said after the game, he kind of tipped his hat to some of those receivers. And then you just, you buckle down next week, and that's what he's done. And I think you really have to look at the full body and not just the kind of microscope plays.
Yep, goes back to the what we talked about earlier with Justin Herbert. All right, next one. Wide receivers Jerry Jeudy, Devontae Smith, Henry Ruggs, all together lumped in. I would think all 3 of these guys go top 60, one scout said, but I'm not sure any of them go top 20. It's a deep draft for receivers, another scout said. I've talked to some other scouts about how teams will be hesitant to take a receiver early because they know they can still get one. There's going to be a lot of receivers on the board in the second and third rounds. The crazy thing about Devontae Smith is that he could end up being the best one out of all of them, another scout said. He's got great hands. He's a great route runner. He's got a knack for making big plays. He's not fazed by situations in games. He's versatile and can play any receiver position inside or outside. He checks off all the boxes except for his size.
That's interesting.
A lot of interesting.
That's very interesting. And also 2 different points I want to make right here. First of all, the depth of positions. You think sometimes the deepest positions will be all over the draft. Deep year for receiver. Oh, it's going to be a run on receivers. Sometimes that makes you promote the non-deep positions because you have to go get them before they're dried up. So you got to go get those trench plays. You got to go get an offensive tackle, which it's not a deep class. You got to go get an interior defensive lineman, not a deep class. Does that mean that those guys get pushed up and the receivers becomes a run on them on day 2? Possibly. So I understand that kind of sentiment there of maybe being that 20 to 60 type of range.
I tend to think that the guys, there's a run. Like, that's kind of how I think I've seen it over the last couple of years. I think back last year, there was so much love for the offensive tackles class, and and that's typically how it goes.
Day 2, the skill players just flew off the board.
Yeah, that's kind of how I feel like it'll go.
And I'm also, now I'm thinking about this receiver class, and there's always so much emphasis on the quarterback and the situation and what team. I'm waiting for a receiver to get drafted and to refuse to go to a team. Not only are you at the mercy of the quarterback you're dealing with. The scheme you're in can make or break your career.
Yeah.
And I don't know if there's enough attention on the situation receivers get put in.
Right.
And right now it seems to be all about player empowerment.
Yep.
And saying, you know what, they control their situation and things like that. And with this deep receiver year, I get to see a receiver maybe not being excited to go to a certain team with a certain scheme. And there's a lot of talented receivers. They're not all going to produce.
Yep.
They're not all going to be hits.
Yep.
So what's the reasons for successes and failures? And some schemes are better than others for receivers.
Well, that's why it's interesting you bring that up, because one team that comes to mind from the NFL that kind of strikes that to me is you look at Tennessee.
Yeah.
And everybody that's been around that team that has either evaluated that from a pro scout standpoint or just has been around them every day would say Corey Davis and A.J. Brown might be the best young duo in the NFL that no one's talking about, but they're not able to produce because injury. Corey Davis has been banged up a little bit. A.J. Brown's still a rookie, but the quarterback play hasn't been great. And there's other situations there that lead to them not being super productive.
I also think about what if Tavon Austin went to an Andy Reid offense as opposed to a Jeff Fisher team where they had him run verticals outside the numbers at 5'8".
Right.
And what they ask these receivers to do is really interesting. And again, going back to Dane's article and some of those receivers that fizzled out, some of it was situation.
Yep.
And you don't get with the right coach and the right coordinator or that right receiver coach or the right quarterback that's accurate and uses you to your skill set. Man, 2-3 years, suddenly you're kind of looked at with a side eye around the NFL. You maybe get one more job and you're out of the league.
Yeah. It's, across the board, situation
and obviously
is so
scheme
important.
fit and situation is very important everywhere. So it's not just the receiver position, but this year being very deep on receiver, pass game oriented NFL scheme seems to be a very big conversation in the NFL these days. So it's just about the situation these players get in. I'm not willing to say if a guy doesn't produce in his first 2-3 years that he's a scrub.
Yep.
Sometimes it's the settings that could kind of set you up for your career as well.
No question. It's a really interesting part of the whole process that doesn't get talked about quite enough. For the rest of that article, make sure just go find Matt Zenitz, AL.com. You can find it on Twitter. You can Google it in the article. There's a lot. It's not just those players. They talked about Najee Harris. They talked about the offensive linemen, Leatherwood and Wills. They talked about the two pass rushers we talked about earlier, Terrell Lewis and Anthony Jennings. So a lot there. Xavier McKinney, I know, was brought up as well. So a lot of guys that you can hit on. Let's quickly, just two Senior Bowl announcements since last week's show. I want to hit on them here. Baylor wide receiver Denzel Mims. I watched him. I haven't watched him yet for this year. I watched him last year, 6'2", 211. Good on contested throws, big-bodied kid, obviously, and was a great high school track athlete. I know a lot of the numbers, the time, speed, and stuff like that has been really good in the past. I want to see how athletic he is in person and be able to create his own separation and just get off the jam a little bit better. I wanted to see that based off of last year's film.
I have all his bio information down. I know he's a track star.
Yep.
And I see he's been putting up a lot of numbers down there from Matt Rule's offense. Not sure how diverse of a route tree they have him running at Baylor right now. A lot of stuff outside the numbers and, stop, goes, double moves, trying to take advantage of his speed. But it's another guy that's going to look really good running with the ball in his hand. And him and Brandon Ayuk may be competing for the fastest players down there.
They might. And then Akeem Davis-Gaither's a linebacker from Appalachian State, 6'2", 214, a little bit light. Explosive athlete. He was another guy who was a track guy in high school. Man-to-man coverage. He can do that. He can man up on backs, tight ends. Really athletic kid. Play strength, a little bit of a concern. I don't think he sees things quite as quickly as you'd like at this point in his development. For a lot of reasons, I thought he kind of reminded me of a guy the Eagles are going to see this week in Jerome Baker, former Ohio State linebacker. Ended up being, I think, a third-round pick out of Ohio State for the Dolphins. Now is a full-time starter for them after being a role player early. That's kind of how I view Akeem Davis-Gaither.
You don't see a whole lot of App State players make their way down in the Senior Bowl. Was Clifton Duck there last year?
Clifton Duck was not there last year. And Ronald
Jatavis Brown? No, he's Akron.
Yeah,
that's right,
and Ronald Blair was not there either, I don't think, although I think he was injured coming out.
Right.
But Ronald Blair was a good player.
Marcus Cox, that running back?
Marcus Cox, yeah, he was Shrine Game, I believe.
Yeah, that's right.
App State continue to churn guys out.
Yeah, good
Brian
program.
Quick was there. For sure. Yes. Brian Quick was there a few years back.
I'm sure DJ will like having a App State guy down there.
Well, he was involved in the
announcement. I saw that. Yeah, that's pretty cool.
Yeah,
Jim
really
Nagy's doing a great job in kind of diversifying the way that they release those announcements.
Really, really cool.
Yeah.
All right. Well, again, happy Thanksgiving to everybody out there. Ben, happy Thanksgiving to you. I know you don't think of
just a Thursday. Just a Thursday.
Just another Thursday in the world of Ben Fennell. Well, we'll talk to you next week here on the Journey to the Draft podcast, driven by AAA. Always love my discussions with Ben. You know how much he means to me and what he does here with the Philadelphia Eagles, getting us ready for the Eagle Eye in the Sky articles and the podcast and on Eagles Game Plan as well. This week on Eagles Game Plan, Ike Reese and I, we kind of dive into one of the things the Eagles are doing a really good job with from a pressure standpoint on defense, that defense playing at such a high level. So even if you're not an Eagles fan, you want to learn more about what teams around the league are doing from an X and O standpoint, that's something that Ike and I really kind of jump into. It's a scheme that I've seen all around the NFL. A lot of the best defenses are using this scheme. The Eagles are one of the best right now at doing it to create one-on-ones along the defensive line. So something Ike and I jump into right at the top of the show this week on Eagles Game Plan. So keep an eye out for that later this week. PhiladelphiaEagles.com, the Eagles mobile app, Eagles YouTube page. All right, let's now jump in to an interview I'm excited about. A guy from the Philly area. It's time for Kevin Negandhi. He is this week's Mr. Relevant.
It's time for Mr. Relevant.
Really excited to welcome into the Journey to the Draft podcast, driven by AAA, a good friend of the Philadelphia area, a Philadelphia native himself. You can hear him on the College Football Podcast, as well as on SportsCenter, the worldwide leader from ESPN himself. That is one Kevin Negandhi. Kevin, welcome to the show, man. Excited to have you on.
Fran, it's my pleasure to be a part of it. I can't wait to talk about college football and, of course, to do it in the backdrop where it's context for Eagles fans. I could not ask for a better combination. So let's do it.
All right, well, let's go. By the point that the listeners are hearing this, the most recent college football playoff rankings have come out. But you and I both know, outside of getting some insight into how the committee is viewing all of these teams, the rankings don't mean too much because we've got Rivalry Weekend this week. We've got Championship Saturday here in a couple of weeks. So there's a lot that needs to unpack here before we get to the playoff. But in your thought process, how do you feel that these playoff rankings are going to shake out? Who's going to be the Final Four when it's all said and done and the dust settles?
All right, so, the next couple of weeks are basically the playoff. As we've seen, the last month has been the playoffs, with Penn State being bounced out last weekend, with Oregon being bounced out last weekend. So with that in mind, I think there are two huge storylines. And I'm saying let's just assume some chalk here, and that is the idea of LSU beating A&M and LSU beating Georgia. If that were the case, then Georgia's out of the conversation. And Clemson, the ACC, so it would be the biggest shocker of the year if the ACC finds a way to hand Clemson a loss in the championship game, whatever happens on the coastal side. So let's just say Clemson gets there. Ohio State's situation is, I think that they'll handle Michigan. I think that they'll beat either it's Minnesota or Wisconsin. There are two storylines here, as I mentioned, in the top four. The battle for the 1 seed, because you want that 1 seed. I don't think anybody, if you ask in that whole group that's trying to get into the playoff, wants to face Clemson in the first round. So that is the concept is if LSU wins out, Ohio State wins out, you don't want the 2 seed because then you're facing Clemson. That 2-3 matchup, that's a devastating trek to get to the championship game. And so, for me, the battle we're going to see is how LSU wins, how Ohio State wins, especially with Ohio State, who they face, with Michigan in a rivalry game, and then potentially Minnesota or Wisconsin. How are they going to handle it? And then, of course, the next question is, the 4th seed is much to debate because Georgia's holding that spot now, but that's going to play out for itself. Now, hypothetically, if Georgia beats LSU, I think it's the easiest gig for the committee because then Georgia moves up to 3, LSU drops to 4, Ohio State becomes 1, Clemson is 2. And the committee doesn't have to worry about the outside, hey, what about a one-loss Pac-12 team like Utah? What about a one-loss Big 12 team like Oklahoma? So, or, of course, the elephant in the room that everybody keeps talking about, Alabama not making it to the conference championship game, not having their best player on the field, and Tua Tagovailoa. It makes it easier for them. If that does not happen and Georgia loses, I see a Pac-12 one-loss team in Utah getting inside the top 4 to edge out Alabama. And I don't think Oklahoma, when you look at their resume, Granted, they'll have wins against Oklahoma State in the coming weeks, as well as Baylor 2 times in a month. I just don't think the way the committee views the Big 12 that they have a lot of respect for the Big 12. And when you watch Oklahoma in the last month, you don't get the vibe that they are a top 4 team just because of their defense and how it's kind of fallen apart and gone back to 2018. So in my mind right now, I see Utah as the viable 4th team if they win out the rest of the way. But it's going to create a huge discussion because Utah's biggest win, you're going to make the case that it's against a 2-loss Oregon team, right? The Pac-12 championship game, where they could have made a case that, hey, we beat a top 10 team in Oregon if they had only 1 loss.
And I'm so glad that you brought that up because, honestly, one of the things I wanted to ask about was this Utah team. We've talked about them so much on the podcast throughout the course, going back to the summer, all the guys on that defense, studs at all 3 levels. We had Jim Nagy on last week from the Senior Bowl talking about some of those guys on defense. You've got the running back in Zach Moss, a senior quarterback in Tyler Huntley. So they've got a lot of ingredients that you would want for a team that could make a run, in the championship. I remember some people laughed when Lee Corso had named them as a playoff team back in August, in that first episode of College Game Day for the fall. And Utah has done nothing but come through. I've watched a lot of Pac-12 football this year, more so than normal because I've got the newborn at home, and watching them on Friday nights or Saturday night is a little bit easier after he's gone to bed. But watching Utah, watching Oregon, watching USC, I just love this Utah defense. And I wanted to ask you about the Utes, and with an eye towards the NFL, and even the guys that stand out that are playing right now on Saturdays, who's a guy or two that really stands out to you from that Utah football team?
I mean, you got to start first off, their quarterback is really good, and the reason why he doesn't get all the press is because he runs the system really well. He's smart. He doesn't turn over the ball. He's completing 75% of his passes, and then when you have Moss in that backfield, and he's another underrated guy, and I think this plays a role here that they play on the West Coast, and people don't get the chance to see them, and then. When they had the debacle on that Friday night game in the Coliseum and Keaton Slovis, and, he's chucking the ball left and right, and they've got to deal with, a bunch of injuries with USC, but they have a core of wide receivers that are going to play on Sunday. After Utah lost that game, and it was a close game, I think people wrote them off, which is completely unfair. Especially when you have the conversation of, what about, Alabama? What about other one-loss teams, right? So when I view that team, they've got a bunch of dudes. I mean, Bradley on the front line for Utah is phenomenal. They've got a bunch of men that you will see on Sunday that scouts are salivating on the defensive side. But it really comes down to playmakers and the ability to do stuff. And I think Utah is a team that no one talks about that should be talking about Tyler Huntley. If you watch him play at quarterback, and he's got, 14 touchdowns, 2 picks. He protects the football. Zach Moss, nearly 1,200 yards on the ground. They are a dangerous team. I think that anybody that doesn't follow the Pac-12 would be surprised. You'll see them in prime time on ABC Saturday night, and they're facing Colorado, but you'll get an idea of how good that defense is. And I think Bradley's one of those guys on that front line who's just a superstar defensively. He's always in the backfield. I'm a big fan of him. To me, I think Whittingham does such a good job of just quietly building a team, and this is not the Urban Meyers of the Alex Smiths of the world from over a decade ago. Whittingham has set this team up where we are going to be the toughest out every single time you're there, and they are physical. I like Utah a lot. I think a matchup against maybe an LSU squad, I think they could score some points against LSU's defense that has a lot of questions.
Yeah, and you mentioned that that Utah defense. You got in the secondary with guys like Blackman and Burgess and Johnson and Francis Bernard at linebacker. You mentioned the guys up front, Fotu and Anai and Penasini. It's a loaded group. Really, I really hope that they go through. When I watched Oregon lose this past week to ASU, and my heart just sunk for the Utes because I really feel if those teams and when those teams match up in the Pac-12 title game, as long as everything holds true, I really feel feel that the Utes are going to win that game. And so, you mentioned earlier, losing that high quality win, quote unquote, hopefully doesn't take some of the shine off those guys when it comes to playoff time. I'm hoping they're able to find their way in to the Final Four. All right. I want to ask you a question. I love asking people. Go ahead.
I want to say one thing, though. Their linebackers can move, too, Bernard and Lloyd, right?
Yeah.
And they've got so many playmakers, like you mentioned in that secondary in Burgess and Blackman. I just think, though, Ane is 11 sacks. He is such a disruptive force on the end, on the edge. Tafua as well. That those guys will be a nightmare to any type of quarterback that wants to sit in the pocket, because you can't feel comfortable the entire time. And I would be interested to see how Joe Burrow would respond, and the wide receiver core from LSU against that secondary. And granted, that secondary licking their wounds since USC, but if you see what they've done since that USC loss and how they've the one game against Washington, that's in Seattle too, in that environment. But they were great after that USC game. It's like they got the message, right? I mean, since that SC game, they gave it 13 points, 7 points, 3 points, 0 points, 28 to Washington, 3 to Chip Kelly's UCLA squad, and 7 points last week to Arizona. They know what they're doing.
Exactly. I think they're still having nightmares about Michael Pittman Jr. on that Friday night game. But outside of that, I mean, they've been spotless. So I want to ask you, I love talking to people and kind of getting their sense of a player that, maybe they feel they're higher on than most. A guy that's not getting quite the national recognition that they deserve. Some people call it a sleeper or someone that's under the radar. But in your mind, you watch college football in the studio every single Saturday, week after week after week. There's got to be a guy that, stands out to you in your own eyes that you feel just isn't getting the national recognition they deserve.
There's a handful of guys. We're very lucky. Jonathan Bellman, Mark Sanchez, and I get the chance to sit there and watch 6 games at once, right? And you're looking at different things, and we do that for all 3 windows, whether it's the noon games, the 3:30 games, or the 7, 8 o'clock starts. And for me, it's a couple of true freshman quarterbacks. I think Keaton Slovis of USC is going to be on everybody's hot list in next year. He's been so good. What a find for Clay Helton. He's taken a beating when it comes to recruiting, but this is a young man that was, coached by Kurt Warner in high school, 3-star guy out of Arizona. He's put in this position to play because of injuries, and he's done a great job. He's coming off 515 yards against UCLA. Other freshmen quarterbacks like Jaden Daniels that we saw with the upset against Oregon, he's just a special kid for Herman at Arizona State. He's a guy that I think will be in the Heisman conversation next year. Sam Howell from North Carolina, 32 touchdowns as a true freshman quarterback for Mac Brown. And I was with Mac Brown in the summer, and he pointed the kid out, and he's like, that's the guy. And I was like, really? He goes, we haven't decided who's going to be our starting quarterback yet, but that kid, he's special. And we've seen what he's done. I mean, Mac took over a program last year that felt broken, and for him and to be one game away from a bowl game, being bowl eligible, it just shows you the progress of Sam Howell, a true freshman. But there's Quincy Roche of Temple. Yep. He's been phenomenal at the defensive end. I mean, he's in the backfield every single play for the Owls. Sean Bradley as well for the Owls, and that's my love for Temple, all things Temple, because I keep an eye on that team all the time. That defense is so darn good. Jaden Blue on the other side is a fantastic wide receiver for the Owls as well. But a couple of other guys, how about Pat Freiermuth, the tight end for Penn State? Big target. Sanchez kind of calls him a baby Gronk. He's a sophomore. I think that next year he's going to be on everybody's radar when you're talking about transitioning and playing on Sundays. I really like the growth of Minnesota's combination of Tanner Morgan at quarterback. The guy's efficient. He's smart. He's tough. And he's got a really good wide receiver in Rashad Bateman. So I'm bringing up some guys that are not getting all the love because there are many, many other big names like, of course, the Tua Tagovailoas and the Burrows of the world and the Jalen Hurts at quarterback and, what you see at Alabama at wide receiver, what you see at CeeDee Lamb at Oklahoma and, the wide receiver core at LSU. But to me, Bateman's really good, and he's got good, secure hands. And I like to watch guys that are under the radar, that are playmakers that no one's talking about. And I think that the handful I just mentioned are people to keep an eye on down the road.
Yeah, a bunch of guys there to react to. I was glad you brought up Temple guys because from one Temple-made guy to another, very, very happy with what the Owls have been able to put through all the coaching changes over the course of the last few years. For them to continue to build on success after success after success has been great to watch. And, with all these stud quarterbacks around in the junior class, the senior class, some of these young guys, they're getting ready to kind of take over that mantle, which will be a lot of fun here in the next couple of years. And you mentioned the receiving corps around the country, and it seemed, we've talked about some of these top programs. You look at LSU, you look at Ohio State, you look at Alabama, you look around the country, Clemson. All these teams are loaded with playmakers, wide receivers, running backs, tight ends. And if you look at all of these top programs, you got to pick one group that you can roll with going into the playoff or even moving forward into the NFL. Which group of playmakers from these teams do you feel like, all right, this is the group that I would personally want to attach myself to?
Fran, this is a really tough question because I think I've mentioned a couple of groups, but I'm half joking here that I could probably throw for 200 yards if I had Alabama's crew. Because what those kids do, Judy's going to be a top 5 pick because of his route running, right? And you look at Ruggs, and you look at the idea of Devontae Smith, who would be a number 1 on any other team in the country, right? And then Waddle's still on that team. And those guys do such a good job. Tua throws the best ball, I think, of any college football quarterback in the country because it's just a gorgeous-looking ball coming out of his hand. But one thing he has also, not just the deep ball, he throws those slants to those guys, and then the boosters that these guys are all 4.3, 4.2, flirting with that in the 40s. All 4 of these guys I just mentioned, and they all look like they're the prototype new kind of wide receiver, right? And they're all built the same way, and they all have certain uniqueness that make them stand out. And to me, Judy just runs the perfect routes, and that separates him from absolutely everybody when you talk about the class of wide receivers like the C.D. Lambs and the T. Higgins and Chenault from Colorado and even Jalen Reagor from TCU. I really like, Justin Jefferson as well. So when you bring all that in, I take the Alabama crew because I think they're going to make Mac Jones look really good in the Iron Bowl because the slants play such a role in the timing and comfort for a quarterback. And what do we see against Western Carolina? Granted, it's an FCS school. We just saw a lot of that from Mac Jones to get comfortable, right? And then let those kids do all the work on the yak. And they're just so darn good. And you just sit there and you're like, man, when did Alabama – now, granted, they've had a lot of success with Julio Jones through the years and Calvin Ridley, but when did they become suddenly a factory of wide receivers that we're normally seeing from LSU and Clemson and Ohio State? Now you have Alabama in that conversation.
Yeah, that group is just, it's silly. All these guys, you mentioned so many of those guys, you could say, Jalen Waddle is a true sophomore. If he's anywhere else, he is one of the biggest names in college football. Everyone's talking about him as one of the top in the nation. He's the number 4 receiver by default, on this roster because of all the plays that these other guys are making. It's a really, really special group. And, one quarterback who's very familiar with that group is Jalen Hurts at Oklahoma. And I know that you're a big fan of guys that just have outstanding stories and their backgrounds. And I don't know that we've really seen a story like Jalen Hurts from, coming in as a true freshman and leading the team to a national title and leading them almost to a second one, getting benched at halftime, sticking with the program, almost rescuing them in the SEC title game a year later, and then transferring and having all the success that he's having right now with Lincoln Riley. And the question I've got for you is this. What's the next step in this story? In your mind, you've been following college football for so long. You're obviously very tied into what's going on in the NFL as well. In your opinion, how do you feel that the NFL is going to look at Jalen Hurts and how he projects to the next level?
By the way, friend, setting this whole thing up too, before we get to the NFL, I want to say one thing. If we play the role that we did in the top 4 and Utah gets in and Alabama does not, do not be surprised if we see a New Year's Six bowl game, one of the big ones, right, featuring Jalen Hurts in Oklahoma up against Nick Saban in Alabama.
No question.
It writes itself, right? The number on that next to the national championship, I'd like to see how that stacks up because I think that we're trending in that direction. For me, Jalen, I call this the Strictly Business Tour this season, right? He has the perfect demeanor. He handles everything where he doesn't get too high, doesn't get too low. He's seen it all. He handles adversity so well. What he did against Baylor in the second half where he made a couple of costly mistakes, and he's playing without his number one guy, CeeDee Lamb, a top 10 pick in the NFL draft, and he's like, I got it. We'll figure it out. I'm going to find a way. It just shows you the mental strength that Jalen Hurts has. For me, though, I got to tell you, okay, if you look at his numbers, he fits perfectly well into Lincoln Riley's offense. Over 3,000 yards, 30 touchdowns, just 6 picks. I mean, on the ground, he could still do it. I don't know, though, if we've seen him take that next level. He's become a better passer. I mean, you're completing 71% of your passes. I don't know, though, how it transforms to the NFL. I still got questions. I think he's a second-day pick in the draft, and that's rounds 2 and 3. He could be a steal for somebody in the 4th or 5th round. But the way things are trending and the way the league is, and you saw what Lamar Jackson is doing, and Lamar's skill set is a little bit different, but he's gotten so much better as a passer in the NFL. The one thing Lamar has is size, and that's working against Jalen. But it didn't hurt Kyler Murray. But look at Kyler Murray and where he went. He went with the coach that accepts it, that's okay, that wants it in Cliff Kingsbury. Jalen Hurts needs to go to a coach that understands that on the NFL level. That's why we're seeing Lamar Jackson succeed, because they found out, they realized, Harbaugh realized, let's cater to him, right? And I think Roman's done a phenomenal job in making sure the offense caters to him. If Jalen Hurts wants to succeed at the next level, you need coaches and coordinators that will understand that. Instead of saying, you need to fit this, they need to say, how do we make our system fit you? And that could be like a hypothetical if Lincoln Riley decides that somebody just wants to give him a blank checkbook and say, join us, and he's like one of those coaches that can adjust to the talent that he has. I'm not sure we have a lot of NFL coaches that do that well, right? To adjust to the quarterback that they have instead of saying, no, it's my system. No, you have to understand the skill set of who you're bringing in.
It's such an important part of the process when, and not just a quarterback, but across the board, just trying to make sure that these guys put them in position to succeed. That's always been, one of the big axioms with coaches all around the NFL, and the successful ones are the ones that are able to do it the best. My last question for you, Kevin, and I mentioned it earlier, you're from the Philadelphia area. You've always got an eye on what the Eagles are doing. With what you're doing covering college football, you got to have a name or two. I can't wait to hear this, of a guy that you would love to see an Eagles green that you feel really would fit perfectly here in Philadelphia in 2020?
I think there's a couple ways to go here, right? And it depends on where the Eagles fall in the draft in that first round. But, man, the two biggest things they need, I think, is I think they need a cornerback that's ready to make plays. I think they need speed at the wide receiver position. And when I say speed, not veteran speed, as we've been kind of bitten by that bug with the injuries with Mike Wallace as well as Deshaun. They need young speed, and whether that's, Henry Ruggs if he's available, whether that's Devontae Smith if he's available. I love Chenault's size. I love Higgins' size out of Clemson. Those are two guys that I just circle, and I'm like, okay, is T. Higgins the guy that we need instead of we move on from Alshon because of the injury? They need speed. That's the one thing, though, that you're going to get from Devontae Smith, and all right, we have a burner down the field who is young and who's going to separate, because that's the key that this offense has been missing. When you lose Torrey Smith, you don't have somebody spreading things out. It crushes what you want to do underneath. As for cornerback, I think that there's a handful of guys. It just depends on when they draft. Is that C.J. Henderson out of Florida? Xavier McKinney out of Alabama. I love Trayvon Diggs out of Alabama. And we're talking about Stefan's younger brother, who was a wide receiver, and they transitioned him. And he has size at 6'2", and just around 205 pounds. So I'm looking at major programs in the SEC or major programs like the ACC that play a ton of Sunday talent that we know for sure will translate to the next level. And to me, that's what the Eagles desperately need. They need to find guys that play in major Power 5 conferences that, when I say major, like the SEC, where they're facing talent every day that they know is going to play on Sundays. So when we put them out there, they are already tested, and we know they can fit in.
Well, Kevin, really, really appreciate the time for joining us here on the Journey to the Draft podcast, driven by AAA. I want to just give you a quick plug for the work that you guys do over on the College Football Podcast. You, Kirk Herbstreit, David Pollock, you get great guests on every week as well. I know the Bear was on a couple weeks ago. You had Reese Davis on last week. I love listening to the show each week. You do such a great job of playing to all those guys' strengths and kind of feeding into all those guys. Your back and forth with Pollock are always great. So any college football fan, if you're listening to this show and you enjoy podcasts, make sure you go subscribe over to the College Football Podcast. It's a great listen every week. And I just wanted to give you guys a lot of love for the work that you do on a weekly basis.
Fran, I really appreciate that. And everybody has a different personality. My job is to bring out the best in all of them. I love Herbstreit on Mondays. He's great with his insight. This week, his stuff with how Woody and Bo and the Michigan-Ohio State rivalry, why it means so much to him, how those two iconic coaches were family friends of his because of his dad, and he shares that story as they get ready for the rivalry game. And Pollock is the best because he's just a knucklehead. Anybody will tell you that. But he's so much fun to be around, the give and take, and he's one of those guys who loves sitting in a room and watching film. Reese's stories were great. Bear, I love him to death. And then we have Maria Taylor on this week with us to share her experiences in game day. She's got a great story about what exactly happened with Nick Saban during that Q&A. Remember last year, which was a controversial reaction from Saban going off where he didn't like the question, and how suddenly those two are super tight. So you can check it out, the College Football Podcast with Herbie and Pollock, and I appreciate the plug, Fran. It's my first time in the podcast genre, and I'm having a lot of fun doing it this fall.
You are crushing it, Kevin. Really appreciate the time. Like I said, again, here on the Journey to the Draft podcast, driven by AAA. We will talk to you soon. Just an awesome interview there with Kevin Negandhi. He gave us a lot of names to talk about and to think about moving forward, not just over the next few weeks in college football, but moving into the spring with an eye towards the NFL draft. And you can always catch him over on ESPN. Another guy you can catch on ESPN is our friend Greg Cosell, who's a senior producer at NFL Films. And I catch up with Greg each and every week on the Eagle Eye in the Sky podcast, fueled by Gatorade. This week, we talked about what we saw this past week against the Seattle Seahawks, and the Eagles lost, and look forward to this week's matchup against the Miami Dolphins. A lot to break down there with Greg, and we kind of look big picture as well to some things that are working around the league that the Eagles are doing at a very high level, and some of the things that they need to improve on, obviously, on the offensive side of the football. So we cover all of that over on the Eagle Eye in the Sky podcast, fueled by Gatorade. All right, let's now transition to the next part of this show. It's time for Draft Buzz with Tony Pauline.
Now it's time for Draft Buzz.
Very happy to welcome back to the show here on the Journey to the Draft podcast, driven by AAA, our friend Tony Pauline from the Pro Football Network. Tony P, welcome, man. Let's get into the top here. Let's go Draft Buzz. What is the biggest news here surrounding the NFL draft as we sit here in late November?
I'm hearing that it's very likely C.J. Henderson, the cornerback from the University of Florida, is going to enter the draft. Really should come as no surprise, as Florida often loses a lot of underclassmen to the draft, especially in the secondary. A lot of people project Henderson as a first-rounder. I'm going to take a wait-and-see approach. 10 pass breakups this year, no interceptions. Physically, he's got all the tools you want. He's very athletic. He's fast. He's explosive. I think he does need a little work on his technique. But I think C.J. Henderson will add a bit more talent to that cornerback class, from what I'm hearing anyway, for the 2020 NFL Draft.
Yeah, and he's a guy that I've been praising a lot since the summer, since I had a chance to study him. Is there anything else that you're hearing off the wire here?
Well, the only other thing I'm hearing is that A.J. Epinesa, the defensive end from Iowa, may follow suit with Tristan Wirfs, the offensive tackle, and actually stay at Iowa. I'm hearing both guys are heavily leaning, and as I reported a month ago, Wirfs is leaning towards staying in school for his senior year. I'm now hearing Epinesa is leaning towards staying in school. Epinesa is not having the greatest year in the world. Kirk Ferentz does a pretty good job of keeping his underclassmen in tow and having them return to Iowa. So, everyone expects Epinesa to enter the draft. I'm hearing there's a very good chance that he could stay, and I mean, that would be major if both A.J. Epinesa and Tristan Wirfs return to Iowa for another season.
Yeah, and you mentioned it, Kirk Ferentz has always kind of had that track record of being able to keep some of the top juniors from declaring for the draft, keeping them in school until their senior season. All right, who's a player who has really helped himself over the last couple of weeks, Tony, whose stock is on the rise as we're near the end of the college football regular season?
Well, no, if you watch kind of a discrete game that was on, I believe, CBS Sports Network Saturday night, Florida International really beat down the Miami Hurricanes. They were never in the game. And their linebacker, Sage Lewis, who was really well-liked in the scouting community, had 10 tackles, had a major interception at the start of the second half. Sage Lewis, the linebacker from Florida International, is moving up draft boards, and a lot of scouts like him. Now, when I say moving up, he's a guy who came into the season with late-round grades. He's moved into the middle rounds, 63 tackles this season, 3 tackles for loss, also has 3 interceptions, really developing into a 3-down defender, more of your sort of slightly undersized run-and-chase linebacker who I think could play inside linebacker in a 3-4 or potentially middle linebacker in a traditional 4-3 alignment. He's tough, he's nasty, he plays vicious football, but he's also got good instinct. So, while no one on the outside really talks about Sage Lewis, I've heard nothing but good things about him in the scouting community. Fully expect him to be at a postseason All-Star game, whether it be the Shrine Game or possibly the Senior Bowl.
Yeah, and obviously anytime you have any kind of those big performances against bigger opponents, those are always going to stand out. So certainly a huge game for him. But while we're talking about matchups, who's a matchup this week that you're going to be keeping an eye on? Obviously, a lot of big ones here as we have a number of big rivalries this Saturday in college football.
Huge rivalry weekend, and South Carolina, their head coach is probably playing for his job. I know they'd like nothing more than knock Clemson off. And Javon Kinlaw, the big defensive lineman, who was really having a terrific season. I know you've mentioned him. You've been very impressed with the way he's transformed his body. Well, he's transitioned that to productivity on the field. He's basically been unstoppable. He shows great athleticism. I'm really looking forward to watching him go up against that interior Clemson offensive line. Sean Pollard, the center's having a terrific year. Pollard's played tackle. He's played a little guard. Now he's doing a good job at center for Clemson. John Simpson, the offensive guard, highly rated in the scouting community. This is really going to be a matchup. It's going to be a matchup of big bodies, of guys that are explosive. In the case of Sean Pollard, a very intelligent offensive lineman. It'll be interesting to see if Pollard and Simpson from Clemson can really slow down or stop Javon Kinlaw, whose draft stock has gone straight north, really, since the beginning of the season.
Yeah, and certainly one other big rivalry game I'll be keeping an eye on is, obviously, look, all eyes will be on the big noon kickoff with Ohio State, Michigan. That matchup is going to be a big one in the Big Ten. Even though Ohio State, if they were to lose this game, it's not necessarily a killer for them to get into the playoff because they still have the Big Ten title matchup. But, watching this Ohio State receiving core with, Chris Olave, who's not eligible, but you look at KJ Hill, Benjamin Victor, Austin Mack, a lot of really talented receivers there for the Buckeyes. Going up against a Michigan secondary, Lavert Hill is a player who I think is a prototypical press corner. Josh Metellus is a strong safety, is asked to play a lot in the slot. He's going down to the Senior Bowl. So I think when you look at this matchup between the Ohio State receiving core against the Michigan secondary, it'll be big on both sides.
Absolutely. And, that Michigan secondary has played well all season. They've been up and down with the offensive line. They've been up and down at the quarterback position. And this is a huge game. I mean, Jim Harbaugh, it may be do or die for Jim Harbaugh with this game. And the Ohio State receivers, they've been good for 2 years with 2 different quarterbacks. I mean, they've been very consistent. A lot of people thought KJ Hill would have entered the draft last year. Benjamin Victor decided to go back. Very good group. They don't have high production numbers, but that's because there's so many of them, and you can spread the ball around. But they're solid college receivers who I think project well to the next level.
Well, Tony, let's wrap this up here with our mock draft roundup and a guy that we already talked about here in this segment. And we're going to go to a mock draft from Tyler Roman, NBC Sports in Washington, has the Eagles selecting 13th overall and taking Florida corner C.J. Henderson, a guy that you talked about at the top of this segment. You said you want to hold off judgment in terms of pegging him as a first-round pick, but what are your thoughts here? Just, as we sit here today in late November with that value of C.J. Henderson in the middle of round one.
Yeah, 13 is a little bit early for me. I mean, the only way I think he goes 13th is if Trevon Diggs of Alabama and Kristen Fulton of LSU go ahead of him, and I don't think that's going to happen. I grade Henderson right there with Fulton. I think both of them are more bottom third of round one type of cornerbacks. Maybe they go the middle of round one, but I think top 15 at this point in time for a guy like C.J. Henderson, I think is a little bit early as far as I'm concerned. If he goes to the combine, which he will if he eventually enters the draft, which I'm hearing, as I said, and he works out well, I mean, he could go very early because he's got the measurables, and if he runs a good 40 being under 4.4, somebody's going to fall in love with him. I just think he needs a little bit more polish in his game before I'm going to grade him as a top 15 selection.
Yeah, this is a player that I think has all the physical tools. My guess is he's going to test like a freak at the scouting combine in February. Everything that you see on the field, he's got all the tools to be able to be a successful cover corner in the NFL. The question that a lot of people have will be the run defense. I think a lot of people had similar questions about a lot of other top corners that have come out in recent years, in terms of coming downhill and being able to finish tackles one-on-one. But a very, very intriguing prospect from a physical tools standpoint. C.J. Henderson, very, very impressive. Well, Tony, appreciate the time as always here on the Journey to the Draft podcast, driven by AAA. We will talk to you next week, my man. Happy Thanksgiving.
Thanks, and happy Thanksgiving to all the listeners.
Get a behind-the-scenes look at life with the Philadelphia Eagles on the Eagles Insider Podcast presented by Lincoln Financial Group. From football to pop culture, no topic is off limits with Eagles Insider Dave Spadaro. Subscribe today wherever you listen to podcasts. And I felt, coming off of the interview with one insider and Tony Pauline, we'll talk about the Eagles Insider Podcast with Dave Spadaro. I say it all the time, just great access each and every week. A lot of episodes each week now, the different format with that show, so you'll be getting a lot of episodes. If you're an Eagles fan, you have to be subscribed to the Eagles Insider Podcast. All right, let's now transition to a player I'm excited to break down. It's time for Scouting Report.
Dim those lights. We're headed to the film room for the Scouting Report.
All right, so Scouting Report this week on a Senior Bowl wide receiver. We've talked a little bit about this guy. I asked Jim Nagy, the executive director of the Senior Bowl, about Antonio Gandy Golden, a big-framed receiver out of Liberty. He's going to the Senior Bowl. He's a guy that kind of intrigues me, and I asked Jim about him last week, and I thought, this week I'll go through all my notes on him and get a sense. I've watched 3 games, so certainly not done my evaluation. Excited to do more. Excited to see him in person down in Mobile. But this is a guy, a 3-year starter, his first for head coach Hugh Freeze in that spread offense. Mostly lined up at X receiver. He's a 6'4", 15-pound kid. So big body, thick frame, good length for the position. He's a solid athlete. He's got the ability to get in and out of breaks well. For a bigger wideout, he's got some giddy up and he can get to top speed quickly. He's got solid vertical ability overall. So while he's not a true burner, he can certainly work down the field. Wins with play strength early in the down at the line of scrimmage and has a couple of tools in the toolbox to beat a press corner. He holds that vertical stem well. I think he's got a plan as a route runner. Still some things to clean up, but he snaps out of cuts well. He's not going to win every route with precision right now, but I think he's got enough quickness to separate, especially with his frame. He's got good body control along the sidelines, awareness to keep his feet in bounds, does a really good job on contested situations at the college level, certainly can play above the rim and win, snatches the ball really, really consistent at the catch point. He's got really good hands and surprisingly very good after the catch as well. Again, he's got a little bit of giddy up. He's got good juice to pull away from defenders in the open field. And it's not just, they're an independent, they're at the FBS level, so they're not just playing, lower level schools. I've watched him against Rutgers. I've watched him against Syracuse. Week 1, he goes 6 for 119 against Syracuse. I watched the game a month ago against Rutgers, 5 for 68 and a touchdown. 2 weeks ago versus BYU, 10 for 162 and a score. Last week against Virginia, 6 for 60 and a score. This guy's averaging over 18 yards per catch on the season. Last week, Ben had tweeted out just how productive he's been. And you look at the numbers, he leads the country right now in catches of over 10 plus, 47. He leads the country right now in catches of 20 plus yards with 22, 50 plus yards. He leads the country with 6 of them. So we talk about the big play threats, down in Alabama and LSU and Clemson and Oklahoma. Well, this kid has got the ability to create big plays. Again, not a true burner, not a guy that's going to run 4.3, but excited to watch more examples of him tracking the deep ball, but a big-bodied kid who gets in and out of cuts well, really consistent at the catch point. Interested to see how he does down in Mobile in January at the Senior Bowl. Ben made the comparison before to Kenny Golladay. I think he's very, very similar in a lot of ways. So that's my report on on Antonio Gandy Golden out of Liberty. Now, let's transition to your questions in our draft mailbag.
Now it's time to hear from you, the fans, in the draft mailbag.
This week on Draft Mailbag, we've got one question from our Apple Podcast page. It's from Write Him, who left a 5-star review and left a comment and a question. The comment was about the Andy Weidl episode. Loved the episode with Andy Weidl, getting behind-the-scenes look at the process this time of year. And yeah, if you guys have not had a chance, go back a couple weeks ago, listen to our visit with Andy Weidl, the Eagles VP of Player Personnel, and just his behind-the-scenes look at what all 32 teams are doing in all the buildings across the NFL right now as they prepare for the end of the college football season, what happens, all the meetings that take place, and then getting ready for the All-Star games and the rest of the pre-draft process. Really cool peek behind the curtain as to what goes on there. But the question from Right Him was, who are the best route runners at wide receiver with good speed? So we'll say from mid 4.3 to mid 4.4 outside of Jerry Jeudy and Henry Ruggs, the two receivers from Alabama. We've talked a little bit about them so far today. So it's a great question. And obviously, I don't know official time speeds at this point. A lot of it is just speculation, but there are a few names that I kind of wrote down. One is a guy that we talked about earlier with Ben, and that's Justin Jefferson. Certainly has some vertical ability, has some of those dynamic qualities to get in and out of breaks, and also to me, from the outside, because I haven't done a full study of him, not like Ben, looks like a guy that can get in and out and has an idea of what he's doing as a route runner. So I would put Justin Jefferson, Jalen Reagor from TCU. I know Ben and I kind of don't see eye to eye on him as well. Ben sees him as kind of more of a gadget player. I think Jalen Reagor has got legit vertical ability and the ability to get in and out of breaks and run routes like an NFL wide receiver. And with that top end speed and that quickness, that guy has a lot of potential. So Jalen Reagor from TCU certainly would fit in that list. Tyler Vaughns from USC, another player that Ben has seen live. I think he's a little bit slender built, kind of like what we've talked about with Jeudy and Jefferson. He's kind of built that same way. He's under 190 pounds, but he's got some savvy to him as a route runner as well as some dynamic qualities down the field. Devin Duvernay from Texas. We've talked a lot about him over the course of the last couple months. Definitely has that top-end speed, especially once he gets out into the open field, and also has shown improved ability as a route runner. Aaron Fuller and KJ Hill. Fuller's from Washington, KJ Hill from Ohio State. Those two guys I think are very similar, kind of similar to a Sterling Shepard who ran the high 4.4s, not a true burner, but have idea what they're doing to create their own separation, but still have a little bit of speed to be able to get downfield. And then Van Jefferson as well from Florida, a transfer from Ole Miss. His father, Sean Jefferson, a longtime receivers coach, a former NFL veteran with the Detroit Lions. So when you look at Van Jefferson, you could tell his dad was a coach and he kind of grew up around the game. There is some savvy there as a route runner, not as much as I would have expected, but still some there, and he's definitely got some vertical ability. I'm excited to dig deeper into this class. I think there are a lot of guys that have one or have the other, and you'd love to see the combination of both speed and quickness with savvy and nuance as a route runner. You put those two together, I think you're kind of cooking with gas. So good question there from Right Him. And again, the best way to throw support towards this podcast, go on Apple Podcasts, wherever you listen, leave us a rating, leave us a comment. It helps boost us up the rankings. And, we can answer your question here on the show like we did today. So, all right. That'll do it. Another long show here today on the Journey to the Draft podcast, driven by AAA. Thanks to Ben, thanks to Tony, and of course to Kevin Negandhi for joining us here on the show. We will be back next week.